Hi everybody, Ramsey from the PinPoint Players. I want to give a quick disclaimer. This episode was recorded on April 15th and talks about the PSN store closure for PS3, Vita, and PSP. We talked about our thoughts regarding the closure and the backwards compatibility, or lack thereof, from Sony and Nintendo. However, a few days later, Sony announced that they were not going to close the store down for PS3 and Vita. Understandably, this changed the nature of the episode with the timing of the press release. Tim and I considered scrapping the episode, but we believe that the points of the episode are still worth mentioning as 1. Eventually, these stores will likely close unless Sony comes up with a cheap solution. 2. Future console marketplaces will still face uncertain future. And 3. Our points on backwards compatibility are still relevant. And lastly, the canceling of the closure was thanks to people like you listening to this podcast. Your continued support of the PSN and contacting Sony helped make this possible. And we both thank you all for doing your part. I'm glad this could happen and hope that this enthusiasm continues into the future. But with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Ramsey here with the PinPoint Players podcast. I'm joined here with my friend Tim.
Hey there.
Today, we're talking about something that's actually a little bit imminent by the time this episode and recording is out. We're talking about the PSN store, online gaming, digital gaming, and backwards compatibility, all under one episode, and kind of just the perils that it faces over the next few months.
Yes, I'm pretty sure the PinPoint Players, you guys are aware that newer consoles have been released this year. The Xbox Series 10, the PlayStation 5, and the Nintendo Switch. I think these are all wonderful systems. The Switch wasn't released this year, but it is part of a new console system. And with new console systems comes the dreaded thing that we're all dreading, the backwards compatibility, which is something we were familiar with when we were growing up, going through our consoles, trading them in, getting new stuff. But they introduced a new system, backwards compatibility, where you can play older games on the newer consoles.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is, when we were younger, when we were kids, when we had the Nintendo, the Super Nintendos, N64s of the world, there was no backwards compatibility with those. You had to get each new each new system and each new cartridge along with it, which was fine at the time. Like, we didn't know better. There wasn't anything else to kind of compare it to. But starting around the Wii PS2 era, that's where we started to get backwards compatibility. Your PS2 could play pretty much all PS1 games, and the Nintendo Wii could play GameCube games. And that was great because you got access to that whole wide world of backlog games. And then even the Xbox 360 allowed you to play most Xbox One games, the original Xbox, not to be confused with the 2013 system.
Yes, that's right.
So, yeah, no, backwards compatibility was kind of to be an expected thing every new generation. I mean, even the early PS3 lets you play almost all PS2 games, but then later on, they actually removed that backwards compatibility in its later system. So, unless you were able to play an emulated port that was available on the system, or you had access to the older PS3s that first came out, the big fat ones, you're out of luck.
So, with the new digital age having dawned upon us, backwards compatibility kind of took a back seat, as it were. People were streaming their games, people were downloading their games digitally. There wasn't really a necessity for the newer generations and consoles to have a backwards compatibility feature. There are games are still sold by disc. You can go to your local Walmart and get the latest game on Blu-ray disc. But a lot of the gaming systems today, especially Xbox, PlayStation, and PC, they do digital download, so there isn't an issue with backwards compatibility because it was always just digitally downloaded. But we mentioned this in a few episodes back that PlayStation's network, PlayStation 3's network, is going to be shutting down later this year. We wanted to give you guys a warning to let you know that the PSP and the PlayStation 3's stores will be shutting down July 2nd of this year. And the PlayStation Vista's online store will be down...
The Vita.
The Vita?
Yeah.
The Vita, thank you. I like calling it the Vista. Windows Vista.
Windows Vista is shutting down. Thank God for that.
Right? But it's the PlayStation Vita. Their online store will be shutting down August 27th of this year. That gives us a period of time to discuss what we want to see happen.
Yes, and that's the thing. That's just the kind of the tip of the iceberg of this conversation. It's a little bit worrying because, so if you own a physical copy of old games. Like if you owned a PS1 game, you could play it on PS2. If you owned a PS2 game, you could play it on the PS2 and then maybe early PS3 systems. Problem is after that, if you own a PS3 game, you're thinking, okay, good, I can just play it on my PS3 even when the network goes down. And for most games, that's probably okay. But there are games every now and then that had a day one patch where when you bought the game, you would download a patch so that way levels would work properly. Because there were certain games that, unless you had this patch, would not work properly. An example that I can remember is the first Wolfenstein game they released on PS3, PS4. Actually, they released it on every system now that I think about it. But the new Wolfenstein, the game, I think that came out in 2014. That one had a day one patch where if you did not download that patch, the game wouldn't work properly. Enemies would behave weirdly. You might not be able to do certain parts of the levels, from what I remember. Like they remember saying that you have to download that, otherwise it doesn't work properly. And so if that's one game that I can think of, there must be other games where that was an issue. And why that's an issue with the PSN store closing is because we're going to all eventually reach a point where you might have the discs for these games, but without these patches, you might be playing a game that's broken and might not work properly. So unless PlayStation, Xbox, and all these other companies that have these old digital games come up with a solution to that, we're going to have problems going forward. And the backwards compatibility does alleviate it to an extent in terms of being able to play some of these games, but these games, without their stores, might be lost forever. That includes digital-only stuff, and that includes patches. So that's why we wanted to talk about both backwards compatibility and the future of these online stores.
Absolutely, because, think about it. From where I'm sitting, my inspiration for gaming came from my parents, believe it or not. My parents started with an Atari, I want to say 2900.
The first one was the 2600, but then they came out a few years later with the 52, so one of those probably.
One of the two.
Yeah.
They brought it up to Maine, and as televisions grew, they were not able to connect the Atari to newer televisions. They were able to get connections, junction boxes, essentially.
You had to get that thing from Radio Shack or someplace. Because I remember, I remember that you had to connect a coaxial to this junction box and then to the TV, and it would work. I remember having to use that until maybe I want to say the beginning of the GameCube era.
It was close to that, yeah. Because after the GameCube, I think, even after the Wii, they had HDMI plugins. It started with, I think it was the PlayStation 3.
Yeah, that was the first time it was available. In the early days, nobody used them because you would have had to have an HDTV, which was incredibly expensive. Like even a 720p 19-inch was like a few $100, so... Just to give you a sense.
But that's what my parents did to keep their gaming systems alive, is they bought the things necessary to keep it playable on the television. And even to this day, we have a really old retro television that we can connect our Atari to. But imagine, going down the line, thinking about it, you have your kids, you're going to have kids, you may even have kids now. But you're going to have that time where you want to introduce them to the games that you played. And let's say 10 years down the line, you still have your PlayStation 3. You love that Battlefield 3 copy that you still have on hard disk, which nobody does because everyone digitally downloaded it. But you knew, you were forward thinking, you thought, this is going to be worth something someday. And guess what? 10 years down the line, it was. So you pop that disc in and all of a sudden you're read with... needs to connect to internet because patch required to play a game. Oh no, what are you going to do now? Well, that's why we're having this conversation, because we want to avoid something like that from happening down the line. As Ramsey stated, it's something that the company should do. I'm just gonna flat out disagree with you, Rambo. It's something that we need to do. If it's something that we want, we have to tell them to do it. So, I believe that if this is something that we want to happen, we need to come up with a strategy, a solid plan, because the company is not going to save things that are not making it money. And that's why they're doing this.
In that sense, regarding the money aspect, I had agree with you 110%. And I do, and with regards to your other points, in the end, here's why I think the companies will have to do something about it. So, let me put a little disclaimer. If the game came out on PC... like say a Steam game, it's like a Steam release or something, chances are it could probably be carried forward to the future, because if it was released on Steam, in the future, if it has to run on a different version of Windows or some other upgrade, there are probably ways of emulating it on PC a lot easier. So that way, if we wanted to play an old copy of, I don't know, some Air Force fighter game from the 90s, I'm sure on PC with a couple of layers and a couple of modifications, it's possible. But where it's different for consoles is Xbox, so Microsoft, Sony, Nintendo, those are all proprietary things. And whereas on PC, it's a more open source platform in terms of the game releases. So where the companies, I feel like, need to provide the first step as far as allowing people to, play these games that may not be available in the future. Like say with the PSN store going down in July and August too. The companies need to be able to provide the tools to these players. And by that I mean, if they're not going to allow the games to be listed on the store because the store is shut down, they have to find a means of letting folks maybe host the information themselves, distribute it. Because I know I'm kind of sounding somewhere, and I know I'm kind of all over the place with this point, but the thing is, because Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo own the servers behind the scenes that allow us to, get these games, they have to at least provide us the framework so that way the gamers can kind of take the next step because they're proprietary. Whereas PC, the framework's kind of already there for the gamers to kind of go and do the legwork themselves.
So, if I may ask, what's stopping somebody from taking a console game? You said that the company needs to provide the framework, but if a person between now and July, hint, hint, if a person between now and then takes a fully updated console version of the game and was able to, I'm not going to say break it, I'm not going to say hack, but I'm going to say discover the key elements that are missing, what would stop them? What would stop them from being that open source?
Because I could see Sony, Microsoft, or Nintendo basically coming down with a fat lawsuit hammer, basically saying that you're doing unauthorized access on the systems that are proprietary systems. Like you're breaking the licensing agreement. In other words, I'm sure that thing that we agree yes to when we're signing in has a bunch of stuff in there that says of things we can't do. So my thinking is that's probably it. They'd probably come and say like you can't do that. So the only way this could work, hint hint, like wink wink, because we're never going to advocate piracy or cracking or mounting or anything like that. The only way I could see something like that working is if somebody were to somehow release the code online from the PS3, the Xbox 360, or I think Nintendo Wii U, depending on like the audience for that. So, which might happen in the future anyway, because we can go back and play emulated Super Nintendo, N64, PS1, and up to PS2 era. After that, it becomes a little bit tougher, but it is possible, I think, with GameCube era and Wii games. I think there are people out there in the community that figured that out. But anything after that, the emulation and just the ability to host something like that, whether it's DLC or patches, becomes very tricky and just very tough. And so my fear is, like I said, if they don't provide that initial framework or kind of throw gamers a bone, I'm afraid some of the digital titles that for now existed on PS3 and only existed digitally on PS3 might be gone forever with no replacement in mind.
And that is a terrifying thought to have. But I'm going to reassure you because I don't believe it's going to get that bad. If we remember, PinPoint players, if you joined us for our second season, there was an episode of the High Score Netflix documentary that we reviewed where the game Gayblade was lost forever. The source files for it were in a box in Hawaii, and he didn't bring them, and they were lost. But through our continued community, gamers like you and me, and you, PinPoint players, we were able to bring the source files for Gayblade back. So I'm not too concerned with the fact that there are people in our community who have games that are on the cutting room floor. We're not going to let those things occur. And a brilliant example that I'd like to bring up is the original beta tests for Gold and Silver and Red and Blue, Pokemon Gold and Silver and Red and Blue. The original source files were leaked online recently, and a host of data for the original games has come to light, and people are wondering why these things weren't incorporated. Nintendo and creatures have their reasoning for not including the content, but the content was still made available publicly. The person who made the leak, anonymity, thank God for the internet, they can't find the person. So if they...
It's probably for the best.
I agree, because a lot of good things have come from that data leak. A lot of people have looked at the data leak and learned how to improve their own skills. They've been able to tamper with the data leak to create Pokemon that actually were supposed to exist and actually incorporate them into the game. This is something that I'm sure Pokemon creatures and Nintendo would absolutely go apeshit for if they were to find these people.
Wait, how many extra Pokemon would there have been?
There were originally 200 Pokemon.
And they chopped it down to 151?
They chopped it down to 150, and at the last second included Mew. So there was 45 Pokemon that are in the original Red and Blue games that are not playable. Do you remember Missing No?
No.
The Missing No glitch, where you could surf Cinnabar Island and multiply the 7th item to infinity?
I heard of it, but I never got to do it myself.
Oh, dude! Wow, that's mind blowing.
No, I never.
Okay.
I never had the opportunity, because by the time I got out of Pokemon and discovered game facts and all that stuff, that's when I realized, oh man, there's all those things you could do with Pokemon. But at that point, I just hadn't been playing it anymore.
Okay. Wow. Well, it's a fascinating glitch. You put the Master Ball in your 7th slot of the item. You surfed up and down Cinnabar Island. You came across a Pokemon called Missing No. That was one of the 45 based off of your trainer name that surfaced and multiplied your 7th item to infinity. Those Pokemon, those Missing No's, are the data inside Pokemon Red and Blue that were the original 45 Pokemon cut.
Oh, no way.
So due to the leaks, we were able to determine how the Missing No worked, how the Missing No lined themselves up, what types of Pokemon Missing No's were supposed to be. We've learned so much through these leaks. And that's what I'm trying to say about the PlayStation Network going down, is I believe people like yourself and Chrono Trigger, people who are passionate about a game, will never forget that game, will not let that game die. We're bringing this up to you, PinPoint players, because we have time between now and then to call an action, essentially, against PlayStation and Nintendo. They are really the two companies that are skipping on backlogging and backwards compatibility. From what I've read, Nintendo's backlog in their online store is just a nostalgia shopping trip. First of all, you need a subscription to pay.
They had a subscription now?
It's a subscription-based service. So to access certain titles on Nintendo, you need to be subscribed to their premium, whatever.
That doesn't sound like Nintendo.
So you need to pay. You need to pay $10 a month. Let's say that you need to pay $10 a month to access their premium subscription service, and then you have to buy the game.
So you need a premium service to access the games, than just to buy the game.
Yep.
That's kind of reminds me of what Disney did with Mulan, where you have to be subscribed to Disney Plus.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh god, that's a habit that we don't need the industry to get into. That's a habit I really don't want the industry to get into. But even that's another topic in its own right. But even just sticking to this, like this narrow scope here, this definition of what we're talking about, that kind of annoys me. Like this was the system of our childhood, and it kind of sucks that they're doing that. But,
it is.
But you bring a good point. I could see in the future, just like they found a way to perfect Super Nintendo, PS1, PS2 emulation, it might take a while because the code compared to the code for the PS3, the source code, from what people are describing as far as emulation, is a nightmare from like the very little I know of it. But I suspect in the future they'll figure it out and they'll find a way to emulate the PS3 games. But I still fear that some games will slip through the cracks that were digital only, because a PS3 Blu-ray disc, I imagine that is an easier process to go through the idea of emulation, because you've got the physical disc, you have to find some way to play it or to strip the data from the disc. But a digital game from a PS3, a proprietary system, That's tricky. That's a lot of kind of cracking to figure that out. And maybe some people have already figured it out or at least are on the lead to it. Same thing with Xbox 360, although less so with Xbox because the Xbox games are a little bit more backwards compatible. So it's not as dire there, but with PlayStation, it's a little bit more dire. So, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of food for thought on that one. Just, I think the emulation will be there in the future, but not for a while just because it sounds like it's a nightmare to do, specifically for PS3.
It does sound like a pretty, daunting task. But, I mean, for the longest time, I didn't think that I'd see a remake or a sequel for 13, which is a game I'm sure everyone is sick and tired of me talking about, but I absolutely love talking about it. I was a huge fan of it, still am, but there was a call. There was a persistent knocking on Ubisoft and whoever bought it, their door. We kept saying, we want to play this game, we want to see this game, don't ignore this game. And as people, as gamers ourselves, when we hear these kind of things, I'm going to assume that there are going to be people who love the game so much that they'd be willing to put in that time and effort, that dauntingness, to make sure that they're able to play that game in the future, to show their children that game in the future. I'm not too worried, but what I do want to get across is that we need to start acting now. We've got time between now and then.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we can't stop the store from being shut down, but we can at least, kind of get out there in the community, the general gaming community, to kind of illustrate why this is important, why, emulation is important, why in some capacity preserving these games is important, and why backwards compatibility is probably the most important thing, the other thing that we're talking about here, because backwards compatibility is something that we took for granted in the PS2, I'm just trying to think. Backwards compatibility is something that we took for granted from the PS2 through the Xbox 360 era. We figured that it was something that, we have it now, they'll always include it. But once they found out that people are willing to go pay for a product again just to have it, they figured, what's the incentive to including it? And it's kind of funny because people ragged on the Xbox One when it came out that it was a restrictive system where you needed to be connected to online for it to work. And they didn't seem that very fan and gamer friendly of the bunch. Like, they didn't have the titles. They seemed to be the most corporate-y of the three. And it's funny that now Xbox is the system that will pretty much allow you to play a catalog of games going all the way back almost 20 years now.
Which I think is actually a genius move on their part. Because
incredibly.
They were the late kid to the party, essentially. Yes. It was always Nintendo or PlayStation for a while, and then Dreamcast came along and they beat the shit out of Dreamcast. And then Xbox came along. We were just like, oh, okay, so it's going to be another beat down on Microsoft. We were like, oh, Microsoft's trying to enter the video gaming console world, stick to PCs. But
they stuck through it.
They did, and in their time as a gaming console system, they were able to look at the mistakes that PlayStation and Nintendo had made. They were also able to look at the mistakes that PlayStation and Nintendo are making currently. And they were able to devise a look around. They were able to explore their options, which I think, as a company, genius move.
Yes.
Late to the party, last to leave.
Yes. They've definitely changed themselves over the 20 years. They've reshaped their image, and the fact that you can play games that are almost 20 years old. Because remember, the very first Xbox console, I think, came out in 2001, maybe at the latest 2002. So you're talking about playing games that are nearly 20 years old. So I think, now don't quote me on this, and I have to go do my homework on this, but I think you can take an original Xbox disc, and provided it's not scuffed to hell, you can put it in your newest Xbox system, and the emulation should still allow it to play. But even if it doesn't, the Xbox One, the previous system, can play a lot of those original Xbox games and 360 games. So kudos to them for doing it. Kudos to them for, changing their image. We were ragging on them. We were giving them crap about 8 years ago when they released their Xbox One system. But right now, they look like the system that's catering a lot to our games. Now, I know Sony's releasing a good chunk of first-party games. They have a lot. Their first-party library is very vast, very large. But honestly, if I'm looking at it as a gamer, I'm choosing between these two systems. It's a tough choice, honestly, because on the side of Sony, you don't have backwards compatibility. I mean, you can play some PS4 games, but I think it's only a select amount. I think it's done through emulation. In other words, it's not that vast.
It's messy.
Yeah, it's from what I'm reading so far, it's messy. It's kind of scattered. Maybe they'll fix that in the future. But right now, the newest Xbox system, provided you can get one, because we're in the middle of a global chip shortage, but provided you can get one, you can play Xbox One and I think Xbox 360 games on it, and that's incredible. The idea that you can do that, something that we thought we'd always have when we were playing PS2, when we were playing Xbox 360, and we had backwards compatibility. But it just goes to show you, nothing's guaranteed, and if they find a way to make a buck off, our nostalgia, like Nintendo's doing and Sony probably might do, they'll do it.
Yeah. So, backtracking a little bit, the framework that we need for these games is essentially the patches. Is that what I'm getting?
Patches is one thing, and I think the DLC, because, let's say you have a game that's included maybe 3 DLC packs, and there are patches to make the games work every single time those patches release. So that's where it gets tricky, because emulation of the old days. So I think early PS3, 360, and before, I think games didn't really need that many patches to work, to function properly, because I think the games, in terms of the architecture, were a lot simpler. And because they were a lot simpler, I think the idea of emulating them wasn't that difficult, because I think in a lot of the DLC back then too, I think was more cosmetic stuff. So as a result, it's not pertinent to get the DLC of those games. So anyway, my point is, early PS3 era before games, I think it won't be too bad in terms of emulation, but I could see late era PS3 games where there are a lot of patches and a lot of DLC. I could see that being a huge problem.
Well, yes, I do too, especially since in those cases, the companies were releasing unfinished products, essentially, is what we're getting at. You needed to download this patch in order for the game to run. You could buy the game, you could ignore the patch, you could play the funky game, but that's not what the game is worth. That's not what you're paying for in the game.
That's part of it, though, because yes, there was a day one patch to make it work properly, but then let's say a game released a DLC, and let's say it was a single player expansion or some sort of like multiplayer add-on, whichever it is, there would be a patch, and then I think they would release. They would have the DLC, but they release a patch with that to make sure that everything works. That everything's kosher when the DLC is released with it, so that way everything can kind of work together seamlessly. Whereas, day one patch is definitely an issue, but when you release DLC, there's always patches with it. And then sometimes they're just patches for security updates, or maybe a couple new features. Like maybe in Call of Duty, they have a patch to change how, I don't know, the Model 1887 would work, something like that. So it depends, honestly.
So seeing as that it depends on the game, we're really going to have to
be fractured.
We're going to have to champion something together as a community. Now, Rambo, what is something that we as the PinPoint players could do to get the attention of these companies that this is an issue, that this is something that they should start addressing, especially since they've made these plans to close the PlayStation 3 and the PSP's store July 2nd, and the PlayStation Vita, PlayStation Vita store.
That's how popular of a system it was.
It's so popular. The PlayStation Vita store, August 27th. What is something that we, the PinPoint players, could do to get the attention of these companies to say, we got to we need a solution to these problems, because they've made these choices without addressing these issues.
Right. And so I think in the long run, the gaming community is very full of a bunch of talented people, and they'll figure out an emulation solution, even with this whole patch crisis that you and I are worried about. I think in the long run, there will be a way they figure it out, but something that really could help stem the tide and create an easier problem for them in the short term and even the medium term, because rather than having the emulator people do all the legwork, people like Sony, in this case, could provide some of the framework. But you asked specifically what they could do, what we could do. So I would say just tweeting at PlayStation support point blank and asking them, hey, what about the digital games on PS3, PSP, Vita? What about those? What about patches? Because yes, we might have the physical game after this is over, and maybe our system is up to date with them. But here's the problem. Let's say our PS3 or whatever system breaks down, you have to go replace it with another one on eBay. That one on eBay isn't up to date. Its firmware is not up to date. It's not going to have those patches of those games that you are playing.
Oh, that's true. The PlayStation 3 actually had 2 different versions to it. One that was acceptable to most PlayStation 1 version games, with a few PlayStation 2 games.
The opposite. Oh no! So all PS3 systems, regardless of the age, can play all PS1 games, or virtually all of them. It was only the very early PS3 systems that were released in like 2006-7 that could play PS2 games.
Thank you. That is what I read. But yeah, it was something along those lines. So if your personal PlayStation 3 system does fail, you may not be able to have the accessibility to get that same model that you had that played those specific games.
Or the game itself, because let's say, so an example on my part, I have the very obscure Intelligent Cube game that was released in North America like 25 years ago. The one I told you about a few episodes back. Yeah. So that's a problem. Let's say my PS3 system works fine right now. I could boot it up, go play it, Bob's Your Uncle, whatever. But in the future, let's say, I don't know, the system fails because at some point the system will get old. Technology gets older, and there are a lot more moving pieces in that system than our old Super Nintendos, Nintendo 64s. So it could fail. So I go replace another one on eBay. I go replace it with another one on eBay. But that's the problem. The one on eBay might have a different firmware version, which is okay-ish, but the problem is it won't have the same patches from the games that I've been playing on it, and it will definitely not have a copy of Intelligent Cube that I downloaded on it. And if there's no PSN store, I can't go re-download it. So I'm screwed. I don't have access to that game anymore.
That PlayStation 3 that you have with that game downloaded on it, that's a piece of history, and it should be taken very good care of.
Yeah, and that should be ported forward. So the PS4 and the PS5, for that matter, should have a way for you to go play these games. So I don't know, like if they found a way to make it work on PS1 through some sort of, you could download a digital PS1 game on the PS3 and play it. So therefore they had the ability to do emulation. So it makes me think there has to be a way to do it also on PS4 and PS5. So my thing is it's possible. So I'm hoping that if they're not working on a solution now to all this, everything we're saying now, specifically Sony, that folks like you and I and anybody listening to this, contacts them via Twitter, or maybe just sending them an email directly and saying like, hey, this is important to us, and we purchased these games and we expect to be able to play them, if not forever, a damn near long time. And then more importantly, we've had fun playing these games. We want to keep playing these games. I still go back every now and then and play old games. We're playing an old game from...
Yeah, we are.
We're playing a game called OpenTTD that we never knew about back when we were in middle school, high school. It's a 17-year-old game, but we like to go back and play that every now and then. Yes, we can go back and we can play the flashy AAA games that just came out recently, but we like the ability to go back and play old games.
I love 13.
Exactly.
Dude, I love 13. We love GoldenEye.
We love GoldenEye. I love Chrono Trigger. We love games that are over 20 years old.
Yeah, Pokemon, dude. Pokemon!
Exactly.
Imagine not being able to... I mean, that was for a brief period because Game Boy Advanced couldn't play Game Boy Color games.
Yeah, right.
But that changed because the people who were passionate about Pokemon ported it to the PC, improved it because it was open source, and then made an even better game, essentially. There's a whole host of modded Pokemon games because that person ported the original open source to an open source file. And what we're coming up to now, if we can't be heard by the companies, if they don't want to do what we're going to ask, essentially we're going to do it on our own. GoldenEye has GoldenEye open source. I'm sure a bunch of people over at Rare Interactive or Rare, Rare. I'm sure there's somebody screwing their heads around, going, "How did this person get our data? How did this person improve our game? Why are so many people enjoying that old game?" Because
if you fight a battle with nostalgia, you will lose 100 out of 100 times.
Yeah, you will. Yeah, you will.
And that's anyway with regards to what we're talking about with these games, why we want them to be ported or in some way carried to the future is the point. We had fun playing these and we want to just be able to keep playing them. So to that end, just circling back a second, I think games that were single player focused mainly in, say, the PS3 era, We'll just stick with that for now. I think those will be the easiest to emulate because since they're single player and if they didn't have any downloadable content, there won't be too much needed to get it up and running. Now, if it required a multiplayer component, or if it had a multiplayer DLC, or if it had a lot of single player DLC and a lot of patches, that's a can of worms that someone's going to have a hard time figuring out. And I think at some point somebody will figure it out, but in the short term and medium term, it's going to be, we might potentially have to go without some of these games that we played during this era.
Now, I want to ask you, Rambo, is that something that you're willing to accept?
Largely, no. I mean, I'll admit, I haven't booted up my PS3 in months, but every now and then I do go back and play some games because I just feel nostalgic for playing some of these old games.
So you won't accept failure in this regard as an option at all. You do not want to see any of these games disappear forever?
Right. I want all the, because for two reasons, two very good reasons, I think. One, the easiest, I paid for it, so therefore I should be able to have it for all time.
Damn straight.
Right? So, I mean, same thing when you pay for a Blu-ray, a DVD, or an old cartridge. You bought it, it should be yours for all time. Although someone will probably say, like, well, there's this licensing agreement when you buy a digital copy, but I'm still going to say, well, you bought something, you should be able to access it all for all time.
Yeah, you took my money.
And then the other thing is simply nostalgia inside me is, embedded deep, and I absolutely don't want to lose those games. And any of those games, like I said, I hate the idea of my PS3 failing and then I can't re-download those games. I'm screwed unless it's available on PS4, PS5, and honestly, you and I grew up with Nintendo, and I don't want to let them off the hook either. I hate that. Unless
it's a subscription service.
I hate that it's a subscription service, and two, I hate that they're reselling us games from our childhood, like all over again and at pretty hefty prices. Like I think, so I haven't been on the Nintendo store in a while, but I think if you want to go buy, like, say, I'm trying to think of a game I remember seeing once.
Sure, Mario Kart. Let's say Mario Kart.
Yeah.
You want to play Mario Kart? Mario Party. There's
right.
Mario Party.
Yeah, I think if you want to go play even any of the classics from the Super Nintendo, I think I remember this once on the Wii or Wii U, the online store, I think was selling these old games for, like, I want to say around $10. And look, I get the idea of maybe selling for a couple bucks because maybe they had to do some stuff on the server to port it, pay for the server access, but the idea of the same game being sold to me like multiple times each system is kind of silly. Like if we purchased it online on the Wii or the Wii U store, I feel like it should be in our Nintendo account and we should be able to access it on the Switch. So I get maybe rebuying it again to help them with maybe the server cost of hosting it there, but I don't like the idea of buying it again potentially on every single Nintendo system. Just for nostalgia. Come on.
I mean, I agree. I don't see the value or the worth, because this happened to us when music went from CDs to iTunes to open source sharing. You had to buy each individual song. If you bought an album, you got all the songs. But, if you went from Android to Apple, your Android purchases didn't carry over to Apple, so you had to re-download or purchase all the music again, and that's just not worth it. That's saying, hey, I sold you an Apple, can you give me $5 for it again?
Right. That's the thing that goes for anything that we buy. You want to buy something once. So even if you buy it on iTunes or you buy it on Amazon, like we'll stick with music for a sec. Let's say you buy a song on any of these platforms. You want to be able to download your MP3 or WAV or FLAC or whatever music file it is, and you want to be able to play it on any of the other platforms. You might have to upload it to your computer, upload it to your phone, whatever. The point is it's your song. You should be able to do that. But I don't like the idea that you might have to buy it on separate platforms just to be able to play it there. That seems kind of silly. Like I'm not sure if it's this way with iTunes, but I remember, so early iTunes days, I think you could just download the MP3 and then you could just burn it to a CD, upload it to your phone, upload it to your computer, upload it to whatever device you want to listen to the song from there. But I think now if you buy music from iTunes, it's a specific file type that you can only play on Apple devices. So you're kind of screwed unless you live in the Apple ecosystem. So your best bet is to either just stream the music from a service like Spotify or something like this, which you might be listening to this podcast on, or you might just have to go to a place that still sells the music with MP3 files or whatever physical media files and download it from there and then re-upload it into your iTunes because, again, it's kind of silly. But anyway, this is the music, but I do agree. This is annoying. This is
Yeah.
annoying. The idea of paying multiple times for the product just for the sole convenience of being able to play it on either the system or listen to it on its device, whatever the medium is.
Yeah.
Same thing with movies too.
Yeah, it is the same thing with movies.
Although with movies, although you tell me with movies, because it's been a while since I bought a movie. With movies, is it less restrictive where you buy it on like, I don't know, Vudu, and you can stream it on all your devices or something?
No, it's specific. It's specific to the streaming service. If I get a movie on Amazon, and I pay for that movie, I can watch.
That's
it
right.
on
That's right.
Amazon.
No, that's right.
But if I was to buy a movie on YouTube, you can buy movies on YouTube.
Oh,
I cannot watch my if I was to watch that movie on YouTube, I'd go to YouTube. But if I were on Amazon and thought, oh well, let me watch that movie because I paid for it on YouTube, I should be able to watch it on Amazon. No, it's not. It's the same. It's different.
so maybe that's just it. Maybe what I'm getting from this conversation, just about gaming, about the loss of the PSN store, Nintendo's store, the lack of backwards compatibility unless it's an Xbox system. It's telling me that in general, it'd be nice to have for all of our media, whether it's movies, games, or music, that we need some sort of standardization. That's when you buy something on one platform, it'd be nice to play it on another platform. Now, or at least have the ability to download your own copy of it and then do with it to your heart's content, like watch it wherever. So it would be nice if there's some sort of standardization. Now, that's probably not going to happen because I could see Hollywood or whatever industry basically saying, nope, you're not going to do that because we like money. But it would be nice.
It would be, and I'm going to encourage the PinPoint players to say that we are the ones who make those choices, regardless of companies deciding to do what they want with their content. We will always act as individual agents of our lives, and there are things that we are told not to do because it's wrong for X, Y, and Z reasons, but we still have the capacity to go out and do those things. For the last 2 weeks, my car's registration has been expired. I renewed it. I didn't have the sticker until recently, but legally, quote unquote, I wasn't allowed to drive with an expired tag. I still did, but I wasn't allowed to because X, Y, and Z reasons. Sony, Nintendo, whatever gaming company is doing this to you, PinPoint players, there are ways around it. There are ways that we can tell these companies that what we care about is important to us, the consumer. From what I understand, Nintendo's store is not doing very well because it's structure. People don't like paying a subscription so that they can pay for a game. We don't have to. We can go find the game another way. We can find people on the internet who have made it easier for us. It's not, it's the black market approach to the situation. But we've always been pirates. We've always been pirates for movies, music, content. It has been that way since the dawn of history. There have always been a black market and pirates.
I'm glad that you mentioned the whole piracy thing. Here's the thing. I remember Gabe Newell, the founder of Steam, said once that, I don't remember the exact quote, but the idea was that if you make something convenient, your piracy will drop down. So if you give people easy access to these games, movies, music, they're not going to want to pirate it. They'll gladly pay for it if you just give them an easy way to access this stuff. And everything we've talked about is relevant to this. I mean, and for what it's worth, for my unsolicited advice for folks listening to this, besides telling Sony, Nintendo, these folks, what you want, specifically Sony in regards to the PSN store, my advice is getting a copy of the things you enjoy. So by that I mean, I would caution folks, if you like downloading games digitally because of its convenience, I understand that. I get that. There's a couple of games where I've done that because, well, there wasn't a physical copy, but it's nice from a convenience to have a digital copy. But I would encourage you guys to get a physical copy because you can kind of protect yourself longer run from that because you have the physical game. You can't take that away from you. They can't remove that from the store, even when the store shut down. Now, patches and everything, that still might be an issue, but you still have the physical game to potentially go play with it. So that'd be my advice. I mean, I still buy Blu-ray movies. I don't buy CDs anymore, so that's kind of pointless. But I'm sure if it was 2005, I would. But get the point. Just if you like something, try and get a physical copy or buy it somewhere online where you can download your own MP3. Or, same thing with movies. However that's maybe possible. Point is, if you like something, get yourself a physical or damn near close to physical copy of it.
Yeah. My advice to the PinPoint players is become pirates. Essentially.
But don't.
We, as the podcast, do not encourage or condone piracy of any sort. Now that that's said, we're not going to let these companies do this to us because we never have we've never stopped letting them do these things to us. We've always found a loop around.
Loophole.
If for some, thank you, loophole, a workaround, a loophole, a loop around. But if we make enough noise and these companies still refuse to give us what we want, we will take it whether they give it to us or not. And that's just the way history has always played out.
That's right. And if these companies want to do the right thing and don't want to lose any revenue, they should just make it easier for gamers to be able to play these games, whether they're 25 years old or they're 5 months old. But with that...
Yeah, that's our episode for today. We wanted to let you know that we are on Instagram at PinPoint Players. Leave us a comment on some of our wonderful posts. You can find us on YouTube. On YouTube, we open Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards. Enjoy some of our unboxings.
If you like what we're doing and like our content, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It greatly helps us with outreach. And on Spotify, give us a follow. Helps us push us up in the algorithm so that way more people like you can give us a listen. And if you want to reach us by email, we are pinpointplayers@gmail.com. And with that, thank you folks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in, PinPoint Players.